Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is the BRN Sunday podcast. I'm going to be joined today by members of the media, academia, and financial services as we go around the globe to analyze all the news this week in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more. We've got another great show, so sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the BRN Sunday podcast. Well, let's kick off the show with a look at technology. Joining me on the line, Daniel Klein. He's Senior Technology and Consumer Products Reporter with The Motley Fool. Dan, how are you?
Hey there, Jeff. I am good. Sometimes simple technology is the best. I got one of those things you sit your coffee cup on and it keeps your coffee warm. And I got to tell you, it's kind of life-changing.
And how much was it, something like that? How much does that cost?
It was like $14 on Amazon. I actually forgot I ordered it. When it showed up, I was pleasantly surprised.
Well, good for you. See, as I always am reminded by my friends and family, it's the little things that matter. So, Dan, let's talk about some big things because there's some news potentially out of Apple that there's going to be some new iPhones for a change. So what can you tell us there?
Yeah, so we're delayed in the iPhone cycle. Usually by now we'd be maybe not buying the new iPhone, but we'd already know it exists, and we'd probably have our pre-orders in. So none of this is official, but rumors are that Apple's going to have 4 different phones. And the interesting thing on this, and really the important thing on this, is all of them are going to be 5G. Why does that matter? Well, we're in the early days of 5G. We've talked about this before. You see Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T join our new 5G network. Well, the reality is they don't really have new 5G networks. They have enhanced 4G networks that work a little bit better. So we're still a while away from true 5G. But that said, if you're going to upgrade your phone, would you buy a phone that doesn't have the next big thing on it? And I think the answer is no. The challenge Apple had is adding 5G is expensive. It adds cost to the phone. And as you know, the iPhone is already pretty expensive. So what did they do? The rumor is, and they haven't confirmed any of this, is that they cut costs in some other areas. They used a cheaper battery, not a worse battery, but a cheaper battery. And they're going to have 4 different price points. So this has a potential for Apple to be, let's call it a super cycle on terms of its phone. There's a certain amount of people that buy a new phone every year. I'm one of those people. I have to have the latest iPhone because I'm stupid.
Well, you're also a Senior Technology and Consumer Products Reporter, so it makes sense for you to have that.
That's how I justify it to my wife. But the one story I write on the phone, and talking about it on Motley Fool Live probably doesn't justify the rather minute changes it has been from year to year. But there's that person, I have to have the latest thing, I get a new phone every year guy. And that's a decent percentage of the audience. Then there's the people who get a new phone every other year. And it happens to be the year they're going to buy it. That's a pretty predictable audience too. But there's also the people that are still holding on to their iPhone 7 or their iPhone 6S or whatever it is, that they're waiting for something truly different in order to upgrade. Well, this might be something truly different enough. And why is that important? Because somewhere between 50 and 70% of Apple's revenue is derived from the iPhone. So if they have a year with enhanced iPhone sales, that's going to push them to new heights. And new heights for a company that's trading at a $2 trillion market cap is pretty impressive. So if you're an Apple shareholder, this is very likely good news.
So, okay, now I want to pull back a little bit because a lot of people hearing what you're saying, and they might be Apple freaks, right? They love Apple or they want the latest thing like you. What are some things that you need to think about if you go to your carrier, right? Because you want to make sure that that's something that your carrier can use, which I'm sure that Apple's already done. But in terms of like your contract, the finances, buying a new phone, Dan, even if you pay it across 24 payments, adds to the cost of your bill every month.
Yeah, so here's what's going to happen. So let's say you financed your phone. I'll tell you my story. I financed my phone and I traded in my old one. So, that offsets some of the cost. But because last year the highest end iPhone was more expensive than the previous year, I had to pay a pretty decent sum up front. I forget the number, but somewhere around $300 in order for my payments to stay the same. Knowing I was going to, even though it's 24 payments, I was going to trade it in after 12. So it's a little bit of tricky math. The smart thing to do for most people is to not finance your phone, or finance your phone, pay it off, and then hold on to the phone until it's no longer usable. There's really not a massive difference in the iPhone 10 versus the iPhone 11. 5G might be really important 12 months from now, it's not likely to be that big a bonus in the phone in the short term. If you're buying the new iPhone, you have to realize you're probably buying it for bragging rights. And look, in my case, that makes sense, maybe. In most people's cases, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I have to think that people are going to wait, especially what's going on with the pandemic. But there are always Apple freaks. I don't know what you call them, fanboys, fangirls that really love Apple products. They're going to be waiting. I don't know how they're going to wait in line. Maybe they'll do it 6 feet apart. Dan, let's switch gears. Talk a little bit about some comparison between Amazon Prime, Walmart Plus, which is a new service, a newer service, Instacart, and Shipt, which I had not heard of.
Shipt is owned by Target, and Shipt Target like has a really mixed message on it. They almost never say the name Shipt, but then sometimes in the ads for Target delivery, the people will be wearing Shipt t-shirts. It's very confusing. And the interesting thing is Target owns it, but Shipt does work like Instacart, where they have partnerships with other brands. It depends where you live, what those brands are. So Shipt and Instacart are pure delivery services. You place your order, you pay either the one-time fee, or in the case of Instacart, you can join. They go into the grocery store, they pick your order, they deliver that order to you in a set window. Amazon Prime, as you know, is free 1 day, in some cases 2 day, but usually 1 day shipping,
Mhm.
plus a whole host of other stuff. Frankly, it's a whole host of other stuff I don't consider all that valuable. There's the video service, there's unlimited photo storage. You probably get your picture with Jeff Bezos if you want, but basically, you're getting it for free 1 day shipping. And that's free 1 day shipping on hundreds of millions of items.
Right.
Walmart currently offers free shipping on orders over $35, but it's only on a couple million items. It's much more limited. Now, Jeff, you could argue that doesn't matter because it's not necessary when I log on to Amazon, if I need, say, I don't know, Tylenol, that there be 2 billion choices of Tylenol. There'll be 42 different packaging sizes and options. And do I want caplets or dropsuls or who knows what they're all called? Whereas Walmart might have two. They might have a big pack and a little pack. So in some ways it doesn't matter, but Walmart is launching Walmart Plus, and you're going to see a lot of hyperbolic headlines. Is Walmart launching a Prime killer? And I will tell you, nobody is dropping Prime for Walmart Plus. Here's why people would join Walmart Plus. It offers unlimited grocery delivery on orders over $35. It's basically an extension of their grocery delivery service, and it gives you free 2 day shipping on orders over $35. By the way, that's what they do for free anyway, so that doesn't make that much sense. It's a very limited service that will appeal to people who are using Walmart to get groceries delivered. And that's probably a significant amount of people in the short term that likely some of them will want to keep doing that post-pandemic. But this is not compared to Amazon Prime. Nobody who's an Amazon fan, even though the Walmart one is cheaper, it's $98 a year, nobody's going to drop Amazon Prime. I'd literally be surprised if 1,000 people did that. So anybody who's calling this a Prime killer is silly. What this is a Walmart enhancer. It's a way for Walmart to solidify its relationship with its most loyal customers. And I think by most accounts, it's going to be a failure. It's not going to live up to the hype, but it probably is going to do what it's supposed to do, which is enhance Walmart's relationship with its best customers and get a little bit more money out of them, get a little bit more convenience to them. It's an interesting product. It's become table stakes to offer delivery. I know that personally, as Amazon continues to roll out grocery, I'll have to think about, let's say they open an Amazon grocery store that's the equivalent of a Publix or a Kroger rather than a Whole Foods, which is a more upscale store. I'll have to think about whether it's worth paying Instacart, because I use Instacart largely to get Publix delivered when I'm too busy during the day to go to the grocery store. And I'll occasionally get alcohol delivered. They'll pick up a Total Wines, which is a really good liquor store. But for the most part, I use it for grocery. Well, if there's an Amazon grocery store down the street and I'm already paying for Prime and I already get delivery there, well, maybe I wouldn't pay for Instacart. But right now, most people need Prime and something else. So maybe the competition here is Walmart and Instacart. But again, as a dedicated Instacart customer, it works really well. I'm not so sure I'd want to switch or even go through the trouble of, inputting my credit card someplace else to switch.
Well, I think you bring up a good point, and I think that point is that Amazon is really entrenched. Everyone I talk to uses Amazon, and it's really hard, and they constantly evolve and change. So it's really hard to displace a company like an Amazon where they're got their tentacles in so many places, and they're evolving. I think it's, it shows resiliency. The brand shows resiliency. They adapt. But I think you also bring up a good point that maybe the others are kind of fighting for number two or number three or a combination of that market share.
It's a lot like the streaming wars. Just because Netflix is winning doesn't mean Disney Plus can't win too.
Yep.
But then after that, it becomes a question: are there going to be three players? Or probably there's going to be a whole lot of number fours, meaning, yeah, the Comcast users are going to like, Peacock. The HBO subscriber is going to enjoy the added features of HBO Max, but none of those are going to be runaway successes. Look, is Shipped additive to Target? Absolutely. It's a convenient service if you're a dedicated Target person and you're getting groceries. Well, that's a benefit. That said, do I really want Target to same day deliver me a shirt, or could I just go to Target? Like, I don't think that's really going to change behaviors, but I do think there's going to be a lot of winners in this space. And look, just because Domino's will deliver you a pizza doesn't mean you won't order delivery from someplace else. So there could be lots of winners in this space, but this isn't the next Amazon Prime.
Yeah, I think I'm reminded of something I think Milton Friedman said. It's not a zero-sum game. Many people can win in the market. And I think you bring up a really, really good point. Dan, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm going to wish you a very long weekend, but I'm looking forward, as always, to catching up with you in our Tech Tuesday segment. And until then, enjoy. Take care.
I'm headed to Disney World. I'll see you next week.
Bye. Welcome back. Now we're going to shift gears, talk personal finance. Joining us on the line, Mari Backman. She's a personal finance journalist with The Motley Fool. Hi, Mari. How are you?
Doing okay, Jeff. How are you?
Doing well. Things shaping up nicely for the Labor Day holiday?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of a holiday it's going to be for me. I'm probably going to work on Labor Day because Tuesday starts back to school and it's back to remote school. So expecting my productivity to take a bit of a hit as we adjust. So probably put in some time Monday, but, hey, you do what you got to do.
Well, I think people understand that, and a lot of people in the same situation, as I know we covered when you were on the network last week. So let's shift gears, talk a little personal finance. What's top of mind for you and the folks at the Motley Fool this week?
Well, so one thing that I've been tracking, and there hasn't been much movement on, is that second stimulus check that a lot of people have been waiting on. And basically what's happened there, Jeff, is that negotiations for a second relief bill have just stalled. Democrats and Republicans cannot come to terms, or they've been unable to come to terms on a relief bill. And until that happens, we're blocked from getting a second stimulus. And, the important thing about, those stimulus checks is basically they're direct payments. You get that money, and it's yours to spend, so you can use it to catch up on some bills or whatnot. But it also serves the very important purpose, as the name implies, of stimulating the economy, of pumping money into the economy. And that's important right now because given our current conditions, there's a lot of smaller businesses out there. They've seen a decline in foot traffic. They've seen a drop in revenue. And those businesses need money pumped into them to survive. So not having those stimulus checks, that's a pretty bad thing.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. Sorry, I was going to say I agree with you. So keep going.
Yeah, so that's unfortunate. Now, what we have instead, and people may have heard, some mutterings about this, what we have instead is President Trump's payroll tax deferral. So basically last month, the president, I think, was getting frustrated that lawmakers were not coming to terms on this stimulus deal. And so he decided to take matters into his own hands. He signed one order to boost unemployment, and there's another order he signed that calls for a payroll tax deferral. So normally, Jeff, when you're a salaried employee, you pay, in addition to your, federal taxes and whatnot, and you pay state taxes on your income, depending on where you live.
Yep.
You also pay payroll taxes. A percentage of your income goes toward funding Social Security. And it's that percentage right now that basically, thanks to the president's order, workers are not going to have to pay starting in September through the end of the year. Now, the payroll tax break applies to anyone who earns $104,000 a year or less. So if your income is 104 or less, starting in September, you should start seeing higher paychecks, slightly higher paychecks. And the purpose of that is sort of to take the place of a stimulus check. And as I'll explain in a minute, it won't really take the place of a stimulus check. But the point here, people are thinking, well, why did the president do this? Well, because that second stimulus check never went out, this is a different tactic to give Americans more money to spend. So we don't have that stimulus check, but instead we've got this payroll tax deferral. So what's going to happen is you're not paying, there's a chunk of taxes that basically you're not paying on your earnings between now and the end of the year. The punchline is your paycheck goes up.
Okay, so your paycheck goes up, but what about those tax deferrals? Those is for Social Security and Medicare, right? So what does that mean for the life?
So
go ahead.
Well, so here's what it means. So first of all, so I said that the payroll tax deferral could conceivably take the place of a second stimulus check, but not really.
Yep.
So here's the not really part. It's a deferral right
Okay.
now. So what's happening is basically workers earning under $104,000 are getting a higher paycheck right now. But unless those deferred taxes are forgiven, what's going to happen is come January, those people are going to need to play catch up. So anyone who's gotten a boost in a paycheck and who's getting a boost right now will probably see that come January 1st, that paycheck starts to get a little bit smaller because what companies are then going to have to do is start withholding more tax come January to sort of catch up on the taxes that are deferred from September through December. Not sure if I said that right. September through December. Months are confusing. So that's why it's sort of like a mixed bag of relief, because the second stimulus check would basically be a no strings attached payment.
Right.
You get this lump sum either by direct deposit or actual check or whatnot, and you get to go out and spend it, and it's yours. You don't have to pay it back. This payroll tax deferral is just a deferral. So it's boosting paychecks right now. But unless those deferred taxes are forgiven, they're going to have to be repaid. And to be fair, the president has stated that if he's reelected, he will seek to have those taxes forgiven. But it's unclear as to whether he'll have the authority to do that. And of course, we don't know if he'll actually get reelected. So it's sort of like this temporary, I call it like this temporary Band-Aid solution, right? We didn't get that second stimulus check out when we thought it would go out. I mean, earlier in the year, it seemed as though there was a good chance that come September, we'd be sitting on a second round of those stimulus checks, and that doesn't seem to be happening. So this is sort of an alternative means of getting money into Americans' hands. But effectively, it's really sort of just a loan when you think about it, because you're getting a higher paycheck now, but if that amount isn't forgiven, you're just going to have a lower paycheck in January. It's not all that helpful.
Yeah, well, a couple of things that I'm thinking of. So I asked you about Social Security and Medicare. Those were typically where those deposits wind up, if I'm not mistaken. So it'll be interesting to see what the health of those two, if it's September to December, which is, which as you outlined, then, what's the impact going to be to those portfolios or those services or however you want to, transfer payments, if that's what you want to call it. That's number one. And then, Mari, do we have a sense, Congress returns after Labor Day? Does this stimulus bill get taken up? I mean, look, going into an election, both sides want to curry favor with the voters. So, obviously the president signing an executive order, the chances are it looks like the Congress, and which is controlled by Democrats, want to do something similar to curry favors. I mean, do you anticipate that it'll be taken back up again when people return?
I think so. I mean, look, it's clear that the relief package that lawmakers are trying to hammer out doesn't just talk about a stimulus check. There's, a lot of other considerations that are, being tossed around as part of a relief bill. I mean, we're talking about boosted unemployment. We're talking about aid for small businesses. We're talking about aid for schools and other things. So the lawmakers definitely need to jump back in and try to hammer out a relief deal. But there's no guarantee that those negotiations will actually produce a bill that calls for a stimulus, even though that was one of the points that both sides seemed to agree upon before negotiations stalled. Republicans have since tossed around what they're calling it, like the skinny stimulus package, and it's a pared down bill that basically, shockingly, does not include that stimulus check that originally they seemed to support. So we still kind of have to wait and see what happens there. To answer your question about Social Security, so Social Security's primary revenue source is none other than payroll taxes.
Yep.
And this year the program's already taken a beating, Jeff, with so many people being unemployed.
Yep.
Unemployment benefits aren't subject to payroll taxes. So all these millions of people who are getting those benefits, Social Security is not seeing a chunk of that, whereas Social Security normally gets funded through payroll taxes. Now, if the September through December deferral ends up being just that, a deferral, it shouldn't hurt Social Security too badly, because eventually that money gets paid back, and so it gets filtered where it needs to go. But if 4 months worth of payroll taxes are indeed forgiven, that could be catastrophic to Social Security, which is another reason why I don't think it's very likely to happen, that those taxes just get written off and everyone gets let off the hook.
Yeah, it's interesting as we're talking about this, you just think about how all these things are interrelated. You talk about retirement, you talk about putting money away in a 401k or having a pension, talk about Social Security, and then the shoe drops out of the economy and everyone's thinking about today. But these changes may have an impact or do have an impact on things down the road. Really important for lawmakers and people just in general to think about as they're contemplating what they need to do for their own budget and their own lives. Mari, always a challenge, always a pleasure chatting with you. It's never a challenge. It is never a challenge. It's a challenge for me to keep up with your intellect, but it's always a pleasure talking with you. Have a great weekend, great holiday. We'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good, Jeff. You too. Bye.
Welcome back. Now we're going to talk about this week in finance. And joining me on the line is Devin Banerjee. He's Senior Financial Services Editor for LinkedIn, and he's also the editor of the This Week in Finance newsletter, which, of course, you can find on the LinkedIn platform. Just go to Devin's name there, and you can subscribe. Devin, thanks for joining us. Great to have you back on the podcast again this week.
Absolutely, Jeff. Happy to be here.
And you pull double duty. We should say that. I just should acknowledge that, because you're on in the mornings and then you come on the podcast on Friday afternoons. So a lot going on. Markets, we talked about double dip recession potentially, corporate culture change. But what is top of mind in terms of the conversations that are having on the great platform known as LinkedIn?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, it was an extremely busy week, again in the news and again on the LinkedIn platform. Let me just start, Jeff, because we're doing this Friday morning, and I just want to distill the latest jobs data. It's the first Friday of the month, which means the monthly jobs report. So let's start with some of the good news. The top line numbers, the jobless rate has dropped down to 8.4%. The economy here in the U.S. added about 1.4 million jobs in August. So this is the first time since, the pandemic really took hold in April that the jobless rate has fallen back below 10%. But if you dig a bit deeper, this is really what has economists and labor market watchers talking about, which is the underlying trends are actually not so positive. So if you look at like core unemployment, for example, which is stripping out temporary layoffs, that's actually still rising. And then, as you and I talked about on the network, permanent job losses are actually still rising as well. Permanent job losses in August rose by about 500,000 to 3.4 million. That's the highest since 2013. And that's really taking into account, business closures going from temporary to permanent, and bankruptcies continuing across the country as well. The job growth figures, those top-line figures, were also inflated by the hiring of about 240,000 temporary workers for the census this year. And most of those census workers will actually be laid off this month. That was just, already predetermined, already pre-planned. Some other takeaways, from the data from the Labor Department this morning: the unemployment rate for Black Americans, about 13%. That's the highest of any group, while that for white Americans is the lowest at about 7%. So we see some people talking about that as well. But this really goes to what you and I talked about on the network, Jeff, which is the concept of a recession within a recession, which is to say we're starting to see those job losses, those business failures, those declines in spending in areas and in industries that are not directly impacted by the virus. And so, what that means is a more permanent effects, permanently pushing workers out of the labor force, permanently lowering wages for many Americans. And that will really leave those long-lasting scars. And it draws a lot of parallels to the 2008 Great Recession. We called that a Great Recession because, for several reasons, but one of them is the recovery was long and painful. And so, just a couple months ago, we were all talking about a sharp rebound or the V shape. That talk is out the window. As you know, you don't hear that anymore. And we're starting to see parallels to that Great Recession and the long, long recovery after it.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's definitely something that we need to take a closer look at. Obviously, the 100,000 small businesses shuttering, if I'm not mistaken, that's the number that I've heard kind of batted around. That's going to employ, those are places that employ people. So I think there are lots of people that are still feeling the pain. As we talked about on the network again this morning, and not just to rehash what we talked about, but I think that we need to get Congress back to work, and since we're down the road of stimulus and things like that, government intervention, we've got to get some kind of government intervention to get people some money as a bridge, because that seems to be, Devin, a stimulus that has really benefited the economy, at least in the short run.
Yeah, and you're right that it's worth a deeper look. There's no uniform kind of experience that Americans are going through. One of those deeper looks that we do here at LinkedIn, as you and I think a lot of listeners know by now, is our Workforce Confidence Index. We had our latest wave come out this past week. Just a couple takeaways there. Looking at industries, I'll start there. We're still seeing entertainment at the bottom there of confidence among professionals. Next at the bottom is travel and recreation. And then one interesting area is healthcare, which has kind of been in the middle of the pack, but we're starting to see workers in the healthcare realm report financial instability as well. Not so much affected by layoffs, Jeff, but many of them are starting to see work hours cut. They're also reporting that they need to spend more on their basic needs. They're spending more on food, supplies, maybe because they're working so much and so hard. And so that's going to be an interesting area to watch, just how healthcare workers are feeling going forward. We're also seeing education professionals. They've always been at the middle of the pack a bit, but now that they're back to school, they are struggling a bit as well. And so we're going to keep an eye on that. In terms of generations, the different generations of the workforce, we also had a cut of that data. We're seeing, as you and I have talked about a bit, baby boomer workers, the most likely to be losing money on investments. They probably have more to lose. They've built up more over time. They've also been, as you and I talked about a couple weeks ago, withdrawing even before they're required to and before they're at retirement age, if they're still working. They've been withdrawing a bit from their retirement accounts. It's not the majority. It's not even close to the majority, but that number is ticking up. So that's going to be interesting to watch. And then we did a cut by gender, and this is just reinforcing the trend that men's confidence, the confidence among male workers, in their finances and in their careers, is about 25% higher than the confidence of women. So again, reinforcing something you and I have talked about, which is women professionals in this country are struggling quite a bit. A lot of them are in traditional, or are in families that think traditionally still, and the women are picking up, more of the child care, et cetera. But also, actually, according to some Census Bureau data, women are also most likely to be working in fields that are being hit pretty hard just by the downturn. So women usually account for about 70% of restaurant server jobs, 74% of teachers and library workers. And so they're both being hit kind of fundamentally in the roles that they're in, and also at home. So that's going to be interesting to watch going forward as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think how we come out of this, as we've talked about it, this is not that V-shaped recovery. Maybe it is for the stock market. That's one thing. But I think economically, just like in 2008, it's going to be a gradual climb for many Americans, and quite frankly, a recalibration both in terms of work culture, work from home, and in adjusting to what the new quote-unquote normal looks like. I hate using that, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Yeah. And, one of the most popular topics on LinkedIn talking about that new normal is returning to work or not returning to work. And some interesting data we featured this week, which is a little bit counterintuitive if you think about it. A lot of people said younger workers and millennials are going to easily adjust to working from home. They understand technology, et cetera. But a really popular Cushman and Wakefield survey out this week shows that younger workers are actually having a harder time working from home now. And it's pushing more of them to want to return to the office now, about 5-6 months into this situation. And so according to this survey, older workers are coping, adapting better to this new normal, as you said. What the younger workers are struggling with is their lack of space. A lot of them aren't owning homes or have a lot of space. More distractions. And then most importantly, and this is what we really saw in the conversation that emerged, most importantly, they're really missing their coworkers. They're missing nurturing connections. And we saw such an interesting conversation unfold here. Some people are saying their best friends or among their best friends are their coworkers, and you just don't see them anymore. There's someone here saying countless small chuckles throughout the workday, stepping out for lunch together, happy hours after work. And this is Libby Jones, a LinkedIn member in our trending item, and she's saying, being abruptly sent home for months, she just misses going to work. She misses seeing her coworkers, and so that was a little bit counterintuitive that the younger folks are starting to crave and report that they really, really want to return to the office.
Yeah, working from home is very isolating. Even if you're married or have a partner, I should say. You can see that person and you have a good relationship, but there are more other relationships that you miss. And I think you develop, I often hear people joke that they have a work wife or a work husband, right? That's different from their spouse.
Exactly.
And you have that relationship that you build. And, obviously, oftentimes it's a mentor-mentee type of relationship or just a peer-to-peer relationship. But I think we're social creatures. We all miss that. And we need to get back to interacting with one another. I think it's just going to take a little bit more time. Hopefully we get a vaccine, and we know the vaccine is going to be prioritized for those that are the most vulnerable among us. But, we do need to get back and find new ways to interact with one another.
I totally agree. And you mentioned mentorship, which we talked about on the network earlier today. That's really an area that has just been kind of eliminated almost, or at least severely limited during this period. There's also the risk of overwork in this work from home situation. Yeah. There's the threat to mental health. I'm sure younger workers are feeling that. So not all roses when it comes to working from home.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think it shows, we're seeing multiple sides, but life's a learned experience, and we're going to all keep learning and adapting, and that's the best we can do because we have no choice. Devin, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. Always appreciate the insights that the team at LinkedIn provides, and also the insights that the platform provides. You have almost 700 million people that are regularly responding. I don't know how you read all those posts, Devin, but kudos to you and the team for doing that.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. We've got a big team now, about 75 people around the world, and we have some cool AI tools to help us. But yeah, certainly a lot of insights.
All right, Devin. Well, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Have a great long week. Thanks for doing double duty, and we'll check in with you again next week.
Sounds good, Jeff. Take care.
Bye-bye. Welcome back. We're going to talk about retirement. Joining me on the line, she is MarketWatch's retirement reporter, Miss Alessandra Melito. Hi, Ali. Welcome back to the program.
Hi, how
Great.
are you?
I'm doing well. Great to talk with you. You getting set for a long weekend?
Yes, very excited.
Good. Yeah, I'm sure. A lot of relaxing, kind of chilling out, maybe drinking some coffee. Probably, I would imagine, are on your agenda. So what's top of mind this week? Obviously, a lot's going on in personal finance in general, but retirement is not taking a back seat at all. What's top of mind for you and the folks at MarketWatch?
Yeah, so the big thing that's happened in the past week has been more information and analysis on Social Security and its health and where it stands in the future. So the Congressional Budget Office came out with an updated budget outlook this week. Originally, it was published in July, but they did some updates to reflect the impact that the pandemic has had on our country. And, I mentioned a lot of things about the budget deficit and just how bleak that situation looks. But it also mentioned Social Security and Medicare programs and just the insolvency date. So as we have discussed in the past, Social Security, the trust funds that support it, are expected to run out of money in the next 15 years or so, 2035-ish. And that year has fluctuated in the past between 2035, 2036, or 2034 in some cases. And it also depends on the trust fund separately. That's the combined year that they are saying that the money will run out. And when that happens, Social Security benefits will still be paid out, but it would be it would be cut, so about 20% or so.
Wow.
And
go ahead. Go ahead. Finish. I'm sorry.
Sorry. So in this update from the CBO, they said that instead of 15 years, we can expect the trust funds to become depleted within 11 years, which, 4 years sooner, which is not good. And that's the result of many things. Social Security does rely heavily on payroll taxes, and there has been record levels of unemployment in, the past couple of months. They said that, sometimes it gets a little too technical for me, but they said something along the lines of the payroll taxes were good for the rest of this year, but we're going to start seeing the impacts next year. But overall, it just goes to show that something does have to be done just to help the programs move along, and we should take it seriously.
Yeah, well, I think that goes without saying, right? I mean, we need to take it's a promised benefit. It needs to remain solvent. And I was talking earlier in the show with Mari Bachman of the Motley Fool, and she mentioned the payroll tax deferral that I think is supposed to be implemented by September. That's Ali, going to have an impact, right? I mean, that clearly, you do something like that, you take away those contributions into the program. As you pointed out in the GAO report, it's significantly hit because of unemployment. Now you take away those payroll taxes for 90 days or whatever the period of time is, September to December. Maybe that's more than that. That could have a big impact.
Yeah, and so that rule is weird.
Yeah, to say the least. To say the least. That's a technical term.
Deferral means that it has to be paid back, but
right.
Then you're putting the responsibility on the employer to pay it back because they're essentially on the hook. They're the ones who are pushing that money through to the government at the end of the year.
Right.
So I don't know how many employers are actually going to go through with it, just because then they would get in trouble if they didn't do if their employers separated from them in that time frame or didn't pay it back, or it could become chaotic.
Yep.
But the essentially that money is supposed to go back into the fund. Now, if Social Security payroll taxes were cut altogether, that's even worse.
Yep.
We when I speak to people like analysts about this, we are to assume that with a deferral, all that money will return to the accounts because it's just a deferral, not a cut. But as we've learned, who knows what will happen? This year has been just a year of surprises. Every month is something new. So who knows what's going to happen in the next couple of months? But yeah, it's just there are a lot of unknowns, and like I said, always surprises. But the other thing to note about this report, the Committee for a Responsible federal budget, did an analysis based on the outlook and said that the youngest retirees of today could face like a quarter of the drop in their benefits when they turn 73. And it also goes without saying that some of the older workers today who haven't quite retired, if they're planning on retiring in 11 years, they could see a cut in their benefits too.
Right.
So this would affect retirement planning. This would affect just overall income assumptions. And it's also important to note, like, the Congress has never let this happen before. And there are ways to make up that money through like general revenue and such, but as it stands, nobody has said anything about what potential solutions there are to fix this, current trajectory. So it's just all up in the air.
Yeah, well, certainly we got an election coming up. All the members of Congress are up. Third of the Senate's up. President's up. I guarantee people don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to bring up too many things and don't offer too many things, because if they do, it could maybe damage their chances of being reelected. It's funny how that all works.
Social Security is considered the third rail of politics. Nobody talks about it until they have to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think they're going to kick the can until at least after November 3rd is the election day, so they'll kick it till November 4th. And then start talking about it after things hopefully have been decided. Well, Allie, always a pleasure chatting with you. Good to catch up with you. We certainly have missed you on the show, but know you're busy. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye. Welcome back. Now time to talk markets. We're going to check in with Kevin Kelly. He's co-founder of Delphi Digital, a cryptocurrency research organization. Kevin also wears the hat of chief equity strategist and has performed that duty for a number of firms. So, Kevin, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Great to talk with you.
Great to be here. Appreciate it.
Did you like my intro? I pretty much laid every title on you.
I did. I like that. I like that a lot.
I just
we should use that. We'll use that going forward. You can just plug that in every time.
I know, but I get out of breath by the time we start the interview. That's the problem with long intros like that. I have to learn to breathe better. Okay, Kevin. I love having you on because you wear multiple hats, as I just indicated. But why don't you give us the deep dive? Lots has happened this week. We were up at 29,000. Now, Friday afternoon, we're talking things taking a little bit of a dip. So what's your overall assessment of the market and the economy?
Yeah, so where do you even begin with this one? So I think what you've seen from an equity standpoint, one, you had stocks really start to kind of get out over their skis. And it became pretty evident, I think, a couple of weeks ago, but you saw the NASDAQ 100, for example, which is very, very tech heavy, tech driven, really just kind of almost turning parabolic. And so from a technical standpoint, you certainly would expect, or I should say, it's not really surprising to see a pretty sizable pullback from those levels, just because, again, as we know, there's no bull market that goes up and to the right in a straight line. But I do think that the reason or rationale is very interesting, right? There's a couple schools of thought, and Oliver, who we both adore, has put out some really great insight recently on these different trends and these kind of different schools of thought, and I very much agree with him. When you look at kind of the market and you think about tech valuations and why tech has really run up, and you've seen that kind of bifurcation of, really the U.S. large cap tech stocks and some of these up and coming challengers to the incumbents versus really the rest of the market, there has been a huge kind of divergence. And so on one hand, people are starting to say, okay, are these tech valuations a little bit too stretched? And the more interesting kind of narrative I think that started to develop is, if you think about some of this economic data that's still surprising the upside, not to say that we're anywhere remotely close to out of the woods, but has been a bit better than expected recently. You're starting to see some of these value stocks look really cheap on a forward earnings basis compared to some of these tech names. When you think about what the kind of driving force behind, that parabolic move in tech stocks really has been over the last, let's call it 3 to really 6 months since they started rallying, it's been on this narrative that, we're going to stay, closed. We're going to be at this kind of work from home environment for longer. And so if you actually do see economies start to open up, it does start to put a bit of pressure on that tech narrative, because again, they're trading on forward expectations of what, you think earnings and cash flows will be not only 12 months from now, but 5, 5, 10 years from now potentially. And if these trends, these longer term kind of secular tailwinds are not as strong as they used to be, if we do have, a responsible reopening, then it kind of puts a bit of a dent in that narrative. And so you'd expect kind of stocks to pull back. The reason why you're seeing some of these headline indices really pull back is because, one, as I mentioned, the Nasdaq's very tech heavy, but so is the S&P, right? I mean, I believe the last I checked it was between 27 and 28% made up of U.S. tech stocks.
Yep.
That sits in that index, right? So it's very, very kind of driven towards that tech momentum trade.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are just kind of watching this, and if you just own a mutual fund or you own the index, they're watching this, and you're just trying to save for retirement. You see this up and back. I just go back to the first thing I always do when I look at the Dow Jones or any indices is I look at where we were 6 months ago, which is at the start of this thing, and then I look at how things cratered, and then I look at how things have bounced back. I guess, how do you look at the underlying fundamentals of the economy, though, and how do you bake that into your assumptions, Kevin? Because you've got a monthly jobs report out. We had, I think, 1.2 million or 1.4 million jobs. Mm-hmm. You've got unemployment that dropped to 8.4%, but clearly there are people that are still impacted by not having a job. There are different groups of people in this country that do not have a job or are still struggling. But how do you bake all that together?
Mm-hmm. And you still don't have very much clarity, if at all, on what the next kind of inevitable fiscal stimulus package is going to look like.
Absolutely.
Right? And so that's where I think the fundamentals right now, I think the flip side of all of this is that I think it's a great environment to be an active manager, because what it forces you to do now is you can't really, again, these indices are very tech heavy, so you could sit in a passive strategy and get exposure to that. But I do think those who are going to really reap the winnings, I guess you could say, in all of this are going to be those who are able to separate kind of the winners from the losers in terms of what this next kind of evolution of not only just the future of work, but the future of business and where that's conducted ends up being, right? And a lot of that obviously going digital, and this concept of digital transformation, we have new business models that are created entirely or are entirely digitally native. That certainly is going to continue, whereas, some of these more brick and mortars are certainly still going to struggle, right? And I think they're going to be out of favor for a long time, even if we did have, a responsible reopening from these levels. What I do think is going to be difficult, and why I think, we're still not out of the woods in terms of where broader, equities go, is, we still haven't really seen this mass wave of insolvencies. They've certainly started, and you saw, I believe it was when you look at, mid to larger firms in the U.S. just saw their highest or fastest rate of bankruptcies in August that we had on record, even surpassed August of 2009. And so that certainly doesn't signal that there's, a really strong recovery. And if you're looking at the underlying economic fundamentals, you mentioned unemployment, you mentioned the payrolls number, again, it's coming in, but it's still, or I should say coming down, but it's still, very, very elevated, right? And even an 8 or 9% unemployment rate is extremely high compared to where we've been for most of the prior 10 years. Yep. And so I think it's kind of it's an investor's market in that if you can position yourself to get ahead of some of these trends or ride the wave of some of these secular trends, you could make out okay. But I do think it's no longer an environment where you can just kind of throw money at, an S&P 500 or an index fund and not at least have an understanding of what it is you're investing in and what the potential headwinds to a large majority of that index could potentially be.
Kevin, switching hats for you, cryptocurrency, a big part of what you do today. How have they reacted this week, and especially in light of some of this economic and market news?
Yeah, so I mean, we've pounded the table on this idea of, that crypto operates in its own vacuum. When times are good and volatility is low, crypto can operate in its own vacuum of sorts. But when you start to see market volatility pick up across other asset classes, crypto is not insulated from that. And so what you saw this week, and the narrative we pounded the table on, and I've been hitting on, is the VIX has remained, elevated relative to historical averages, even though it's come down a bit, certainly from its mid-March highs. As you saw volatility start to actually, and the VIX start to creep higher, I said, listen, one of the biggest risks to, Bitcoin prices from at this point is if you see another volatility spike, because that historically has led to a drop in, Bitcoin, the rest of the crypto market, as well as the broader equity markets. And literally, lo and behold, what did you see this week? Yesterday marked, Bitcoin's worst 2 day stretch since early May, second week of May. And it happened to coincide with the S&P's worst day since I think it was June 11th, and the largest 1 day move higher in the VIX index in almost 3 months. And so again, it's disconnected when times are good and people aren't thinking about it. But when volatility strikes, that is a time in which, the crypto market kind of falls into the risk asset bucket. And that's exactly what we've seen this week. And so we've had a really big run up in some of these crypto subsectors, like your decentralized finance tokens and things of that nature. Those have certainly come in a bit in terms of value from a valuation standpoint over the last couple of days. I mean, still relatively elevated, but from here where these go, I certainly still think that if you're looking out over the long term, I mean, the bull thesis for Bitcoin and crypto only gets stronger by the day. If you're looking to, take a position or add to a position, you thought you missed out on some of these recent gains, I think now is a great time to be looking at and being selective and doing your own due diligence, obviously, looking at some of these projects and some of these, maybe crypto tokens alongside Bitcoin if you're looking to get exposure to that space.
Well, it certainly is playing well around the world. You look at Latin America, the Swiss, other parts of the globe, they are looking heavy and investing heavy. Chinese is another example that in the crypto market. So I guess more to come, but it kind of helps us frame what's happening economically to involve crypto, but also your traditional asset classes. Kevin, it's also always a pleasure chatting with you. Really appreciate the analysis. Have a great long weekend, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks, Jeff. You too. Have a good one.
Welcome back on Time to Shift Gears to Real Estate. Joining me on the line is real estate reporter from MarketWatch, Mr. Jacob Passy. Hi, Jacob.
Hey there.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. Busy week, but hanging in there.
Absolutely. So what's top of mind this week? I know real estate is a passion of yours. Lots going on, I'm assuming. Mortgage rates going down, people trying to flee the city. But what's top of mind for you and the folks at MarketWatch this week?
Yeah, so the big news this week in the real estate world was that the federal government, the CDC, ordered a nationwide eviction moratorium. So this has been something that advocates have been calling for a while now to some extent. But basically on Tuesday, the CDC announced that it was using its authority during, the pandemic to basically create a moratorium on evictions for non-payment of rent. So for tenants, for renters who, have been unemployed and unable to make their full monthly rent payments, they cannot be evicted for just simply not paying the rent. And the eviction moratorium lasts, for now at least, theoretically it could be extended, but it lasts until the end of the year, December 31st. So it's a historic move. Something like this has never really happened before. And so this week since that was announced, I've been following the ins and outs of what was announced and what the implications are for renters, for landlords, for the whole industry.
So what if I am a landlord or I'm a renter, does this vary state to state? Like if the rules in a state are more intrusive or more than what the CDC is recommending, how does that all shape up when you look state by state?
Yeah, great question. So the order specifies that if a state or municipality has an eviction ban or moratorium in place that is more protective or as protective as the new national moratorium, then that state or city moratorium will still be in effect. Mm-hmm. So California, for instance, this week also passed their own eviction moratorium, which is very expansive. It lasts until February 1st of 2021. But it has slightly different rules. For instance, the national moratorium, there are certain rules that certain things you have to do to qualify. The national moratorium, for instance, requires you to send a letter to your landlord basically declaring that you can't pay the rent in full, that you've attempted to receive government assistance, that you have lost work or income as a result of the pandemic, etc. In California, to be covered by their moratorium, you do have to pay at least 25% of your monthly rent. That is not the case with the national moratorium. So in California, though, because it is more protective since it lasts until February, if you're a California resident, you have to abide by that. But, let's say, for instance, like in Louisiana, they had an eviction moratorium that has since expired. Now the national moratorium will be in effect. Or, in New York, for instance, there's an eviction moratorium that ends at the end of September. So until the end of September, New York's moratorium will be the one that's the law of the land. And then after that point, the national moratorium will be, the prevailing rule unless the state were to, pass a new version of its state moratorium.
Wow. So I have to think, like when we talked about this several months ago, landlords were up in arms because this has a direct impact. Some people are landlords. They're not corporate landlords, meaning they're not corporations. They're just individuals who own a family, might own a home or multiple homes and be leasing that out. So what's the impact to landlords? I got to think that they've got their hands up saying, what do we need to do?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Housing advocates and the rental industry alike are very upset that the national moratorium did not come with added funding for emergency rent relief. So the Trump administration, when they were talking about this new moratorium from the CDC, they made mention of funds that were appropriated through the CARES Act at the Department of Housing and Urban Development and at the Treasury Department that could be used by, renters to pay their rent or things like that. But those are pre-existing funds. A lot of those funds have already been used. Also, none of those funds are specifically only for rent. They can go to a variety of uses. So housing advocates and, landlords have basically said, this isn't actually canceling evictions or preventing evictions. It's just delaying evictions.
Right.
Because come January 1st, if there is not, emergency rent assistance, passed by Congress and signed into law by President Trump, then anyone who hasn't been able to pay the rent, chances are they're not going to be able to, come up with that money, if they're still unemployed and things like that, or if they were unemployed for a long stretch of time. And that's many months of rent that you'll owe and back rent. And so, a lot of these folks could still be evicted come January 1st. This is not, and like you said, a lot of, landlords, about half of landlords nationwide are small mom and pop landlords. They only own a few properties. And so they are in a really tight bind because already for some of them, they were already, facing situations where tenants hadn't paid the rent for many months. And now, because this moratorium's in effect until December 31st, they could have gone, almost a full year, 9 months without receiving rent from some of their tenants. And there hasn't been rent assistance passed, in a major way thus far. The House in the HEROES Act, which was their kind of follow-up bill, the House Democrats included $100 billion for emergency rent assistance. And that, when I talked with folks in the industry and housing advocates, everyone kind of said that's also the floor because, that bill was passed in the House back in April. Well, the situation has continued since then. And now, we're talking about not just, a few, renters that are covered. Every renter nationwide is now covered by this moratorium. So it's hard to, calculate exactly what the need is. But certainly, if we don't see emergency rent assistance passed in the coming months, you're going to see evictions begin again whenever the moratorium ends and lots of folks losing their homes. And you're also going to see landlords going into foreclosure because they just haven't received the income that they need to be able to, pay the bills.
Yeah, I like I said, I agree with you. I don't think this shouldn't pit one group of people against another. I think there's a lot of financial implications here. And does it really solve the problem by kicking the can down the road for another 30, 60 days? People need to have jobs. They need to get back to work and be able to pay their bills. If they can do those things, then yes, a moratorium or delay makes sense, but only if they can get back to work and we can get back to full employment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Jacob, always a pleasure chatting with you. Really interesting developments this week. I can see why you're extremely busy, but you do deserve time off with friends and family. Enjoy the rest of the weekend, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Yeah, talk soon. Take care.
Welcome back. Now time to end things as we always do with a visit from the Legal Eagles. David Levine, Kevin Walsh are both principals with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, D.C. Gentlemen, how are you this Friday?
We are great, Jeff. Thanks for having us.
It's great to talk to you as always. So, Kevin, what's top of mind this week?
So top of mind this week is just the continuing onslaught of guidance from the Labor Department. This week, we saw a pre-publication version of a proposal that's coming out probably next week called Fiduciary Duties Regarding Proxy Voting and Shareholder Rights. And this is important because the SEC overhauled its proxy voting rules earlier this year, and plans and plan fiduciaries have kind of had two questions. One is, am I really a fiduciary when I make decisions with respect to proxy voting? And two, how closely do I have to look at this? How closely do I have to look at proxies when I make a decision? And kind of how much should I spend? And in the benefit plan space, we've seen kind of a big movement in recent years towards outsourcing proxy voting,
Yep.
Using some of the big proxy voting firms to make decisions for plans. And that comes with some expense. And the Department of Labor in this rule came out and said, essentially, plan fiduciaries, you are a fiduciary with respect to proxy voting decisions. But if you look at a proxy vote or have a proxy voting policy that says if it's not an obvious decision, if it's not an easy decision, if it doesn't look like it's going to have an economic impact, then you don't have to vote the proxies. So in some way, this is the antithesis of the ESG rule, which said, all things are never equal, like take a close look. This rule is saying, hey, plan fiduciaries, you're overthinking this. So, we're going to see what the comments look like. This could be a welcome rule for some plans. On the other hand, you might get less oversight of corporate shareholder decisions from plan fiduciaries as a result of this. David, do you have any thoughts or anything you want to add?
Sure. I think one big takeaway from this, Kevin, is as we look forward, obviously it's part of tying it together with the ESG guidance and everything else. But to me, it's a real question of, is this going to add additional responsibilities, whether to a plan, to trustees? And as we look at this already, I think it's important. Remember, this isn't effective yet, and it could easily change. But if we go forward, it's another part in the process manual that people are going to have to follow, even if you don't have to vote all the time. So my big takeaway on this is that watch and say, does this actually work in a practical basis? And if not, like we're talking to people about, comment, because I think it's good to make something that's workable and actually functional rather than something that adds more process steps. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah. And David, you're making great points there because, on the one hand, it could make life easier for plan fiduciaries to say, this isn't going to have an economic impact. We don't need to vote it. On the other hand, if you're a fiduciary for lots of different plans and suppose a collective vehicle, it could give you a headache if you're trying to make decisions on behalf of a whole bunch of plans that have different proxy voting policies. Another area where this could cause some compliance headaches is it suggests that you need to review your proxy voting policy every 2 years. And, that might be an easy lift. It might be a heavy lift. It's going to come down to, seeing what that ends up meaning in practice, seeing what that means from enforcement in the long run. But, David, you're making great points. This is a proposal, not a final rule. Not only that, but it's a proposal that's coming out in September of an election year. DOL has a whole lot on its plate, and it's very difficult to see a clear path for this to be finalized before an inauguration, but stranger things have happened.
Yeah, definitely stranger things happened. I think back to December. Well, guys, really, gentlemen, I should say, not guys, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Really interesting, and we'll be watching this, among other things, on the regulatory front and legislative front very closely. Have a great weekend, a long weekend, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you so much.
It's always good being on, Jeff. Thanks for having us. Bye.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the BRN Sunday podcast. I want to thank all of our great contributors for their time this week, and I want to thank you, the audience, for stopping by. We're off tomorrow because it's Labor Day, but we'll be back again on Tuesday with BRN AM. I'll be joined by the Motley Fool's Daniel Klein. So until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe Keep on saving and don't forget, roll with the changes.